Hey everyone, this is Will at Third and Long. Welcome to another 2024 college football off-season video. So this past week, 247 Sports and Fanduel did come out with the Vegas predictions for all of the major conferences for the 2024 college football season. So we just looked at the SEC predictions. You can look at my other video for that. But now we're going to be looking at the predictions for the ACC conference. They are adding in 3 new teams this season. We have SMU coming over, we have Cal, and we have Stanford. So that bumps the conference up to 17 total teams. They had 12 teams make bowl games last year. As of right now, they are predicted to have 11 teams qualify for a bowl. There's a lot of off-season stuff going on. As of right now, we do know that Florida State is currently suing to get out of the conference. If they successfully get out, they're probably going to be followed by the big brands, Clemson, UNC, Miami. So a lot of teams could potentially be looking to jump ship from the conference, but that's not going to happen this year, but it could possibly set up for, 2025 or 2026. But let's get things started looking at the win predictions and kind of breaking that down, and if we agree with what Vegas is picking as of right now, and make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. So kicking things off, the very first team that Vegas picked was the Stanford Cardinals. So Stanford's obviously coming over from the defunct Pac-12. Last year they went 3-9. This was a really bad team. Sometimes their offense looked pretty good, but most of the time it was complete garbage. This is not a good football program at all. Basically, since Harbaugh left, Shaw kind of picked things up from there, but then things fell apart after Christian McCaffrey left. Shaw has since left. This team is really going nowhere, and they are coming into a decently competitive conference. Looking at and they have them predicted to get 3.5 wins as of right now. So they basically have them following up their 3-win campaign last year with another 3-win campaign this year. And their schedule is TCU, so a pretty tough out-of-conference game there. Cal Poly, and then Syracuse, Clemson, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, SMU, Wake Forest, NC State, Louisville, Cal, San Jose State. They have 2 pretty decently tough out-of-conference games, TCU and Notre Dame. I don't think that sits well for them. I think this is a 3-win team, probably 4 wins max. So Vegas is right on with them coming in at 3.5 wins as of right now. The next team that Vegas predicted was the Virginia Cavaliers. This is Tony Elliott's team. They have them coming in at 4.5 wins. So Virginia went 2-6 in the conference last season. They were the worst ACC team in conference play. Looking at their schedule, they have a couple easy games starting out until they get into conference play. They have Richmond, Wake Forest, Maryland, Coastal Carolina, and then it just keeps getting tough there. Boston College, Louisville, Clemson, North Carolina, Pitt, Notre Dame, another tough out-of-conference game, SMU, and Virginia Tech. That's a decently tough schedule. So things are kind of easy there starting out with Richmond and Wake Forest and Coastal Carolina. But then, boom, Louisville, Clemson, UNC, Pitt, Notre Dame, SMU. So they kind of finished the season with 3 to 4 consecutive ranked teams. I think this is a 4-win team. So they're predicted to get 4.5 wins. This team has a lot of problems. They have no offense. They have no defense. I have them coming in at 4 wins for the 2024 season. The next team that we're going to be looking at is the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. This is another team that basically since Sam Hartman left, they've had issues finding their footing on both sides of the ball. They have no leader. Started out last year, had a good win to start the season, and then things completely fell apart from that point forward. The issue is offense. The issue is defense. They have a lot of issues, but this is a tough team to recruit to. They have them coming in at 4.5 wins looking at their schedule. It's North Carolina A&T, so that's a win. And then Virginia, Ole Miss, that's a really tough out-of-conference game. And then Louisiana, NC State, Clemson, UConn, Stanford, Cal, North Carolina, Miami, and Duke. I think this is this is tough. That's a pretty tough schedule. I have Wake Forest coming in at 4 wins. I can see why Vegas came in at 4.5. I think definitely 5 wins is their ceiling. That's their max. But I'm going to go with the Demon Deacons getting 4 wins this season. Boston College is the next team that Vegas looked at. They're basically working their way up from the lowest team to the highest win predictions. They have the Boston College Eagles coming in at 4.5 wins as well. Boston College, they're breaking in Bill O'Brien as the head coach. He just got hired, 1 to 2 weeks ago. So he is in there now. They're going to have a complete change on offense. They had a running quarterback team last year with Castellanos. They have Bill O'Brien coming in. He's going to have the quarterback scrambling, but he's definitely going to try to go more pass heavy. But this is a complete rebuild. So they were 7-6 last year. They were a pretty decently competitive team. They almost beat FSU last season, but they've had a lot of players leave. They've had a coaching change. They've had a philosophy change. They have them getting 4.5 wins. And their schedule, they have kicking things off Florida State, then Duquesne, then Missouri, Michigan State, Western Kentucky, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Louisville, Syracuse, SMU, North Carolina, Pitt. That's not an easy schedule, but it's not a difficult schedule. I have Boston College probably getting around 5 wins next season. So with Vegas coming in at 4.5, they were probably spot on right there. The next team that we'll be taking a look at is the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. They actually had a surprisingly strong season last year. So they finished last year 7-6. They were 5-3 in the conference. But they played really good. They were really competitive in a lot of their losses. No one had them going 7-6 last year. So props to them. They are bringing King back at quarterback, but they lost 21 players to the transfer portal. That's a massive loss. They have a lot of turnover. That's probably going to hold them back this year. But Vegas has them coming in at 5.5 wins, and their schedule is not easy. So kicking things off, they play Florida State first week in Ireland for some reason. Then they have Georgia State, Syracuse, VMI, Louisville, Duke, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Miami, NC State, and Georgia. That is a god-awful, tough schedule. Georgia Tech's going to be playing a lot of top 15 teams. I mean, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Georgia, NC State, Louisville, these are all ranked teams. So I think Georgia Tech, they're looking at 5 wins, maybe 4 to 5 wins. Vegas has them getting 5.5 wins, so hovering from 5 to possibly getting a bowl game. If they can get 6 wins with that schedule, props to them. The next season that we're looking at is the Pittsburgh Panthers. So this is usually a really competitive team, really tough team. They usually have a decent run-heavy offense, and then they always have a very good defense. Last year, they had neither. Their offense was horrible. Defense was horrible. They finished last year 3-9. I don't see that as a regular thing going forward. This is always a good team, always a tough, well-coached, physical team. Look for them to get the ship right. They had issues at quarterback last year. They had issues on the D-line. They did add some pieces through the portal, specifically at quarterback, getting the transfer Holstein from Alabama. They added some guys on the D-line. So this should be a better team than last year. Looking at their schedule, it's not too bad. So they start things out, Kent State, Cincinnati, West Virginia, Youngstown State, North Carolina, Cal, Syracuse, SMU, Virginia, Clemson, Louisville, Boston College. It's not an easy schedule, but that's not a bad schedule. So Vegas has them coming in at 5.5 wins. I think this is a team that could ceiling get 7 wins as of right now, which would be a big improvement over last year. But I'm going to go with them coming in with 6 wins this season. The next team we're looking at is also another newcomer to the ACC, and that's the Cal Golden Bears. So this is Justin Wilcox's team. They didn't make a bowl game last season. They were actually pretty decent last year. They almost beat Auburn in the second week last season. They were a run-heavy team last year, and they had a lot of really competitive games throughout the Pac-12. Now they're coming to the ACC. They're going to be doing a lot of cross-country traveling, but Vegas has them coming in at 6.5 wins. So hovering between 6 to 7 wins, so making another bowl game back-to-back. Looking at their schedule, they have UC Davis, Auburn, San Diego State, Florida State, Miami, Pitt, NC State, Oregon State, Wake Forest, Syracuse, Stanford, and SMU. So I have them coming in at about 6 wins, so making back-to-back bowls. If they're able to beat Auburn, they almost beat them last year. If they beat Auburn, then I think that gets them to 7 wins. But Vegas is right. They're about a 6 to 7 win team. I have them coming in just under at 6 wins, but if they get the upset versus Auburn, that'll be their 7th win. Now we're moving on to the Duke Blue Devils. So they went 8-5 last year, but Mike Elko is gone. He's now the head coach at Texas A&M, but they're bringing in Manny Diaz. Manny Diaz is very familiar with Duke. He's very familiar with the ACC from back when he was the head coach at Miami. He's coming over as the D coordinator at Penn State, who had a top 5 defense. Really good defensive coordinator. He's a decent coach. This is a good pickup for Duke, though. Manny can recruit, but they're going to have a very physical, very aggressive defense. And they're also bringing over Malik Murphy as quarterback, who's the transfer from Texas. He was the backup there this past season. So Duke's not going to look like they were last year. They have changes at the skill positions, but their defense should probably get better. Vegas has them winning 6.5 wins, so hovering between 6 to 7 wins. Looking at their schedule, things are really easy this first portion. They have Elon, Northwestern, UConn, Middle Tennessee. So they're basically going to start the season 4-0. Really strong start. Then things get a little difficult. They have North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Florida State, SMU, Miami, NC State, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest. So kind of a loaded back half of the schedule. But I think Manny Diaz can get 7 wins out of the schedule. So Vegas has them at 6.5, and I'm going to go with them winning 7 games. Now we're looking at the Syracuse Orange, which Vegas has getting 6.5 wins. Syracuse is one of those teams every year they start out 4-0, 5-0, then they completely nosedive and train wreck. But they have a completely different team now. So they got rid of Babers. They have a new coach. They're bringing in Fran Brown as the coach. They have a transfer quarterback, Kyle McCord from Ohio State. So they're going to be a completely different team, completely different mentality. But Vegas has them getting 6.5 wins. Looking at their schedule, it's not too bad. So you start out with Ohio, Georgia Tech, Stanford, Holy Cross, UNLV, NC State, Pitt, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Cal, UConn, Miami. I see why Vegas said 6.5, because when I look at the schedule, I saw them getting 6 to 7 wins with the changes on the roster, with the new coach. I'm going to probably lean more towards 6, but I think that their ceiling is 7. The next team is also one of the new teams and the best of the new teams. We have the SMU Mustangs. Vegas is predicting them to get 7.5 wins, so hovering between 7 to 8 wins. This is a really good team under Rhett Lashley. They won their conference last year. They had 10 to 11 wins last season. They were, I think, number 2 in the transfer portal last season. They had another good transfer class. Their recruiting is getting better because their NIL has a lot of money. So they're a program basically that's trying to get back to prominence, and they're pumping a lot of money into their football program right now. They have Preston Stone coming back at quarterback. He had 3,200 yards last year, 28 touchdowns. A lot of people don't know. They had a top 25 offense and a top 25 defense last season. Yes, it was not in a Power 5 conference, but when they played the Power 5 conferences, they actually did really well. So this is a pretty stock team, and I think they're going to surprise a lot of people that haven't been watching them for the last few years. Looking at their schedule, they have Houston Christian, BYU, TCU, Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, Duke, Pitt, Boston College, Virginia Tech, Cal. So they avoid a lot of the bigwigs, the tough teams in the ACC conference this season. So Vegas has them as 7.5. I'm going to go with the over there. So I have them getting 8 wins this year. A really good first year for Rhett Lashley and the Mustangs in the ACC. We're also now looking at the Virginia Tech Hokies. Vegas has them coming in at 7.5 wins. This was another surprise team in the ACC last year. So they finished their last 9 games 6-3. So props to them. They had a really good second half of the season. They have drones back at quarterback. They have a lot of D-line players coming back. So this should be a better team typically than last season. Looking at their schedule, they have Vanderbilt, Marshall, Old Dominion, Rutgers. So pretty easy start to the schedule. Then things start getting a little tougher. Then they have Miami, Stanford, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Clemson, Duke, Virginia. I have Virginia Tech getting 7 wins. So they're predicted to get 7.5. I'm going to go with just the under there, getting 7 wins. It's still a really strong season. This was a complete rebuild of this program, and they're still making a lot of steps going forward. Next up is the Louisville Cardinals. Vegas has them coming in at 8.5 8.5 wins. So Jeff Brom's team last year, they hit the 10-win mark. Yes, their last 2 games were god-awful, but no one had them getting 10 wins. So they had a really strong 2023 season. They did lose their quarterback, Plummer, but they're bringing in Tyler Shaw, who is the transfer quarterback. He transferred from the Oregon Ducks to the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Now he's coming to his 3rd team with the Louisville Cardinals. They're also bringing back a lot of their main playmakers with Castellon coming back. So they're going to have playmakers there. They are going to have a strong running game and strong slot receivers. And they actually had a top 30 defense. A lot of people don't know that, but this is a pretty well-rounded team. But Brom is an offensive guy, so they're definitely going to be able to score points. Looking at their schedule, they start out with Austin Peay, Jacksonville State, Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, a lot of tough out-of-conference. Notre Dame is playing a lot of ACC guys this year. And then they have SMU, Virginia, Miami, Boston College, Clemson, Stanford, Pitt, and Kentucky. So not one of the easier schedules, but not one of the more difficult schedules. They do have some cupcakes there. I have this team. I'm going to put their ceiling at 8 wins. So I'm going to go with the under here. I don't have them hovering up to 9 wins. I have them getting 8 wins, which is still a pretty decent year. Shaw's not a great quarterback, so I don't think he's going to technically replace Plummer. Not that Plummer was that good, but I have them going about 8-4 in the 2024 season. Next up is the NC State Wolfpack. Vegas has them getting 8.5 wins this season. They do have a couple changes. So they have Grayson McCall transferring over from Coastal Carolina. They still have a lot of their playmakers. They still have Waters. They still have Conception. So they have the playmakers there, and NC State always has a top 25 defense. So they're going to get after the quarterback. I'd say their biggest issue last year was they didn't have a good offense. They had like the 70th ranked offense. It should be a little better this year. Grayson McCall, I don't know how good of a pickup he really is. He really hasn't been good since the 2020 season, but he's probably going to be better than they had last season. Looking at their schedule, they have a pretty easy schedule too. They start out with Western Carolina, Tennessee at Charlotte, Louisiana Tech, then Clemson, Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, Syracuse, Cal, Stanford, Duke, Georgia Tech, and North Carolina. So they don't play Miami. They don't play Florida State. They really don't have a bad schedule at all. They don't have any big out-of-conference games. It's all cupcakes. So I'm going to go with NC State having a really strong season and getting 9 wins. Next, we're looking at Mac Brown's North Carolina Tar Heels. Vegas has them going 8-5, so hovering between 8 to 9 wins. This team's turned out a lot of good quarterbacks. They had Sam Howell. They had Drake May. They went 8-5 last year, but that's not Drake May's fault. The issue has always been defense for this team for the last 5 years, basically. But they're bringing in Mac Johnson as the quarterback. He's the transfer from Texas A&M. They're going to have a lot of playmakers. So they had a couple guys out last season. Their wide receiver core should be getting better. Max Johnson is a decent quarterback. He's not Drake May, but they have a really easy schedule. So looking at their schedule, they start out with Minnesota, Charlotte, NC Central, James Madison. So they could conceivably start out 4-0. And then they have Duke, Pitt, Georgia Tech, Virginia, Florida State, Wake Forest, Boston College, NC State. So they don't play Clemson. They don't play Miami. I think things are setting up right now for the Tar Heels to probably go 9-3 at best. Next up is the Clemson Tigers. Vegas has them getting 9.5 wins. Obviously, last season wasn't their best season, but they did round things out. They finished on a 5-game winning streak to finish the year 9-4. They had a top 10 defense. Their issue was the offense. It was basically the running game and the passing game. Cade Klubnik was a 5-star, so hopefully he should be better this season if they can get the offense figured out. This is going to be a really competitive team. They're not as good as they were 5 years ago, but this is still a well-stacked roster, and they definitely can compete in the ACC, and they're going to have more offensive weapons this year. So they're going to have a better wide receiver core. That was the main thing holding them back last year, and they had a lot of fumbles at the running back position. But this team can only go as far as Cade Klubnik carries them. So he's basically the key. But Vegas has them getting 9.5 wins. Their schedule, they start out the year with Georgia. Really tough game there. Then they have App State, NC State, Stanford, Florida State, Wake Forest, Virginia, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt, the Citadel, and South Carolina. I think the schedule right now, they're going to hover between 9 to 10 wins. If I had to pick one, I'm going to go with the over and have them getting 10 wins this season. So a really strong comeback season for them. Outside of that Georgia game, they really don't have a tough schedule. Next up is the Miami Hurricanes. Vegas has them getting 9.5 wins. That's a big upgrade over where Miami's been falling before. But with Miami, you always want to be careful because every year they're always back and they always disappoint. But this is a really good team. So they're bringing in a top 30 defense from last year, a top 35 offense. Tyler Van Dyke is gone at quarterback, but they definitely had a massive upgrade. So they're bringing in Cam Ward. So he could obviously technically put up Heisman-level numbers with Shannon Dawson. They have really deep running back. They have great wide receivers. They have a good tight end room, even though they don't use them too much. But Cameron Ward is the big difference, and that defense is going to be a top 20 defense. So they're going to get after it. And they actually have a pretty easy schedule. So they start out the year Florida, Florida A&M, Ball State, South Florida, Virginia Tech, Cal, Louisville, Florida State, Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Syracuse. That is not a tough schedule at all. So outside of Florida State, almost every game is practically a win, but it is Miami. You want to be careful because they always disappoint. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say this year they don't disappoint. I have them getting 10 wins. And closing things out, the team that got snubbed from the playoffs this past season, Florida State Seminoles, and Vegas has them getting 9.5 wins. So following up last year's really good regular season, their undefeated regular season with a 9 to 10 win season right now. Looking at their schedule, like we said earlier, they have Georgia Tech in Ireland for some reason, and then Boston College, Memphis, Cal, SMU, Clemson, Duke, Miami, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Charles Southern, and Florida. So their toughest games there, you're looking at Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame. That is a pretty tough little stretch there. This is a pretty decent team. Obviously, they play a transfer portal as good as anyone. They're bringing in a top 10 class this season. They are bringing in DJU from Oregon State. So they're going to continue great play at the quarterback position. They have a lot of playmakers. They had a really good defense last season, had a top 15 defense, had a top 25 offense. I think they're going to take just a little step back this year because they did lose a lot of great playmakers, a lot of guys that'll be first and second round picks. I have them probably going about 9-3 this year. I think 10-2 would probably be their ceiling just because they're having to retool some positions, but I'm going to go with them going 9-3, which is still a really good season. So that's our breakdown of the Fanduel and 247 win predictions for the ACC conference. Hit that like button and subscribe